The last harvest. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the rolling cornfields of eastern Iowa, turning the morning dew into thousands of tiny diamonds. It was the kind of sunrise that made visitors stop their cars and take pictures. For Jack Miller, however, it was simply another workday. At 68 years old, Jack had seen nearly every kind of season a farmer could imagine. He had lived through droughts that cracked the earth, floods that swallowed entire fields, and harvests so plentiful that every grain bin on the property overflowed. Farming wasn't just what he did, it was who he was. The Miller family had owned the same 600 acres for nearly a century. Jack's grandfather had purchased the land shortly after returning from World War I. With little more than a horse, a plow, and determination, he transformed the prairie into productive farmland. Jack's father expanded the operation after World War II, introducing tractors and modern equipment. Together, they built the red barn that still stood proudly beside the farmhouse, its weathered boards telling stories of countless seasons. Now the responsibility rested on Jack's shoulders. Every morning before sunrise, he poured himself a cup of black coffee, slipped on his faded work boots, and walked outside to greet the land. He believed a farmer should know every inch of his fields, not just from maps or computers, but by feeling the soil beneath his boots. This year, though, the land felt different. The rains had come too late in the spring and too heavily during the summer. Rising fuel prices, expensive fertilizer, and unpredictable weather had turned every decision into a gamble. Jack often wondered if farming had become less about growing crops and more about surviving uncertainty. One afternoon, while repairing a fence near the north pasture, his phone rang. It was his son, Ethan. "Dad, how are things?" Jack smiled as he leaned against the fence post. "Oh, corn's looking decent. Beans could be better." Ethan laughed. "You always say that." There was a brief silence before Ethan continued. "I got promoted today. That's wonderful. I'll be leading a software development team. I'm proud of you, son." Jack meant every word. When Ethan graduated from college 10 years earlier, he had accepted a job with a technology company in Chicago. He designed software that helped businesses analyze data and improve efficiency. It wasn't farming, but it was honest work. Jack had never asked Ethan to come home. He understood that every generation had to find its own path. Still, when he walked through the empty machine shed, he sometimes imagined what it would have been like to work beside his son, the way he'd once worked beside his own father. After hanging up, Jack looked across the fields. The wind rippled through the corn like waves across a green ocean. Beautiful, peaceful, yet beneath that beauty lay thousands of dollars in risk. The following week, disaster struck. Just as harvest season began, the combine shuddered violently before coming to a complete stop. Jack climbed down from the cab and stared at the machine in disbelief. He knew that sound. The transmission had failed. The mechanic confirmed his fears. "It's going to cost close to $40,000. Jack removed his cap and scratched his gray hair. $40,000. That was nearly everything he'd managed to save after paying loans, taxes, seed costs, and equipment maintenance. For the first time in decades, Jack considered leaving part of his crops standing in the field. Without the combine, he couldn't finish harvesting before winter weather arrived. That evening, he sat alone on the porch as the sun disappeared behind the grain silos. His wife, Mary, placed 2 mugs of coffee on the small wooden table. "You've been quiet today." Jack sighed. "I don't know if I can keep doing this." Mary looked toward the fields. "You've been saying that every harvest for 20 years. This time I mean it." She reached for his hand. "We've survived hard years before." Jack nodded slowly. "But we've never been this close." The next morning before dawn, an unexpected pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Jack looked through the kitchen window. Ethan, his son, stepped out carrying a duffel bag. "I took the week off." Jack embraced him tightly. "I didn't expect you. I figured you could use an extra pair of hands." For the next several days, father and son worked together, repairing fences, cleaning grain bins, and servicing smaller equipment while they waited for news about the combine. Although Ethan hadn't farmed in years, the routines quickly returned. He remembered how to grease machinery, how to stack seed bags, how to judge whether corn was dry enough for storage. One evening, after dinner, Ethan wandered into the old barn. Dust floated through beams of fading sunlight. On one wall hung dozens of photographs. His great-grandfather standing beside horses. His grandfather smiling atop the family's first tractor. A young Jack proudly holding Ethan as a baby in front of the combine. Ethan realized something. Every generation in those pictures had believed the farm would continue. Yet he had spent the last decade believing it would end with his father. Later that night, the two men sat outside, watching lightning flicker on the distant horizon. "Dad," Ethan asked quietly, "why didn't you ever ask me to come back?" Jack smiled faintly. "Because love isn't asking someone to live your dream." Ethan stared toward the dark fields. "I always thought leaving was the only way to build a future. And was it? I built a career. But," Ethan hesitated, "I don't think I've built a life." The old farmer looked at his son for a long moment, but said nothing. Sometimes, he knew, silence allowed people to hear truths they had been avoiding. The next morning, Ethan walked through every field with a notebook in hand. He noticed uneven crop growth, drainage issues, and areas where fertilizer had clearly been over-applied. His years in technology had trained him to look for patterns. By the time he returned to the farmhouse, an idea had begun to take shape. Maybe the future of the Miller farm didn't depend on working harder. Maybe it depended on working smarter. As he opened his laptop at the kitchen table, Jack raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" Ethan smiled. "I'm going to show you something that might save this farm." Jack folded his arms, curious but skeptical. For the first time in years, both father and son felt something they hadn't experienced in a long while. Hope. Jack looked at the laptop screen as though it were a foreign language. Charts, colorful maps, and weather data filled the display. "I know this looks complicated," Ethan said, smiling, "but it isn't. This technology can tell us which parts of the field need more fertilizer, which parts need less, and where the soil is losing moisture." Jack leaned closer. "You can tell all that from a computer?" "Not just the computer," Ethan replied. "The computer collects information from satellites, soil sensors, and drones. Instead of treating every acre the same, we can give each part of the field exactly what it needs." Jack scratched his chin. "When your grandfather farmed, he could read the land just by walking it. And that's still valuable," Ethan said. "The difference is that now we can combine experience with better information." For the next few weeks, father and son worked side by side. Ethan contacted agricultural extension specialists, researched conservation programs, and found grants that could help cover part of the cost of upgrading equipment. Jack reached out to neighboring farmers, borrowing machinery so they could finish harvesting before the first snow. The community responded without hesitation. One neighbor arrived with a combine. Another brought a grain truck. Someone else delivered homemade casseroles for the workers. Nobody kept track of who owed whom. That was simply how farming communities survived. When the final wagon load of corn reached the grain elevator, Jack felt an enormous weight lift from his shoulders. The harvest hadn't been perfect, but they had saved the crop. Winter gave the Millers something they hadn't enjoyed in years: time to plan, instead of simply reacting. Together, they redesigned the operation. Instead of planting only corn and soybeans, they added wheat to improve crop rotation. They planted cover crops that protected the soil during winter and reduced erosion. Along the edge of one field, they established wildflower strips to attract bees and other pollinators. Ethan also installed moisture sensors and GPS guidance systems on the tractors. Jack resisted at first. "I've driven these fields my whole life without satellites?" Ethan laughed. "I'm not replacing you, Dad. I'm helping the tractor drive straighter than either of us can." After a few days behind the wheel, Jack admitted something he never expected. "It does save fuel, and seed, and my back." The two men laughed together. Spring arrived with steady rains instead of flooding. The fields responded beautifully. For the first time in years, every decision felt intentional instead of desperate. Word spread throughout the county that the Miller farm was changing. Some older farmers were skeptical. Others were curious. Soon, neighbors stopped by asking questions about drones, soil health, and conservation practices. Rather than keeping their ideas secret, Jack and Ethan invited everyone to learn together. One Saturday morning, they hosted an open farm day. Families walked through the fields. Children climbed into tractors. Local high school students watched drones fly over the crops while Ethan explained how technology could help farmers reduce waste and protect the environment. Jack stood nearby, answering questions about crop rotation, weather patterns, and the lessons he'd learned over 5 decades. People quickly realized that the future of farming wasn't choosing between old traditions and new technology. It was bringing them together. As summer arrived, something unexpected happened. The Millers converted an unused corner of the farm into a small market. Mary baked pies using apples from their orchard. Local beekeepers sold honey. Neighbors displayed handmade quilts, jams, fresh vegetables, and flowers. Every Saturday, families from nearby towns visited. Children picked pumpkins in the fall, wandered through sunflower fields, and learned where their food came from. For many visitors, it was their first time stepping onto a working farm. Jack loved watching children ask questions. How tall does corn grow? Why do cows chew so much? Can chickens really remember people? Their curiosity reminded him why farming mattered. It wasn't only about producing crops. It was about feeding families and connecting people to the land. Late that August, another challenge arrived. Meteorologists predicted one of the strongest windstorms the region had seen in years. The family spent 2 exhausting days securing equipment, reinforcing buildings, and harvesting as much as possible before the storm. When the winds finally came, they exceeded 60 miles per hour. Rain lashed against the farmhouse windows. Tree branches snapped. Power lines fell. By morning, portions of the cornfield lay flattened. Jack walked the fields in silence. Years ago, a storm like this would have broken him. Instead, Ethan joined him. We lost some. We did. But not everything. Jack looked around. The cover crops had reduced erosion. Improved drainage had prevented flooding. Their diversified income from the farm market and conservation programs meant they weren't relying entirely on one crop. They had built resilience. Not perfection, resilience. Several weeks later, harvest season returned. Golden combines rolled through the fields beneath brilliant blue skies. Neighbors once again helped one another, just as they always had. When the last truck pulled away, Jack climbed the hill overlooking the farm. The setting sun bathed the barns in warm orange light. His granddaughter, Emma, ran toward him carrying a handful of rich black soil. "Grandpa," she opened her tiny hands. "Look what I found." Jack knelt beside her. "What do you see?" "Dirt," he smiled gently. "I see something different." "What?" "I see next year's harvest." Emma looked puzzled. "But there's nothing growing." "Not yet." He scooped up a small handful of soil. "Everything begins here. Every loaf of bread, every ear of corn, every apple pie, every meal shared around a family table." She thought about that for a moment. "So the soil is alive?" Jack nodded. "If we take care of it, it'll take care of us." Years passed. The Miller farm became known across the county, not because it was the biggest, but because it embraced both heritage and innovation. College students visited to study sustainable farming. Local schools scheduled field trips every autumn. Young farmers came to learn about conservation, technology, and building profitable family operations. Jack officially retired from driving the combine, though he still insisted on checking the crops every morning with a cup of coffee in his hand. Old habits, he said, were worth keeping. One crisp October evening, the entire family gathered on the porch. Mary served warm apple pie while grandchildren laughed in the yard. The fields stretched toward the horizon, glowing beneath the setting sun, just as they had when Jack was a boy. Ethan stood beside his father. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think success meant leaving this place." Jack smiled. "And now?" "Now I think success means leaving it better than we found it." Jack looked across the land his grandfather had once broken with horses, his father had cultivated with tractors, and his son had strengthened with technology. Each generation had faced different challenges. Each had adapted. Each had refused to give up. The farm had survived not because the seasons were easy, but because the people who cared for it believed that every setback carried the possibility of another beginning. As darkness settled over the fields, Jack tipped his weathered cap toward the land one last time. He knew the farm would someday belong entirely to the next generation. For the first time in many years, that thought didn't fill him with worry. It filled him with gratitude. Because the true harvest had never been measured only in bushels of corn or acres of soybeans. It was measured in family, faith, neighbors helping neighbors, and the courage to plant seeds even when tomorrow was uncertain. And as long as there were hands willing to work the soil, hearts willing to protect it, and families willing to believe in its promise, the American farm would remain more than a business. It would remain a symbol of hope. One harvest, one family, and one generation at a time. If you find this story interesting, feel free to click on the like and subscribe button and let us know where you're watching from.